When one thinks of safety, the idea of advanced technology to keep us secure comes to mind. What people don't take into consideration is the world before the discovery of such technology. A world where sometimes the guilty roamed free on the streets, where people went missing and could never be found, or where violent crimes were committed and left unsolved. A world where there was no awareness of the power of fingerprints. Fingerprint identification has improved the overall efficiency of the world's security. Fingerprints make for a more reliable source of evidence in a court of law, are used to track missing people, and have spurred the use of science in criminology. To understand the sophistication of security today, we must travel back in time to the inception of the world's first medium of scientific identification. In 1858, a British officer in India named William James Herschel made a contract with a local businessman and required him to imprint his hand on the contract. With no scientific thought in mind, Herschel stated that this was purely to frighten him out of all thought of repudiating his signature. But as he began to create more contracts with the natives, he in fact did begin to see how the prints could prove or disprove identity. By using some of Herschel's knowledge, Alphonse Bertillon, a clerk in the prefecture of Paris, France, created a system of identification in 1882 called the Bertillon system. This system identified a person by measuring the length and width of their head, middle finger, left foot, and forearm.
The theory was that these things don't change. Once your arm has grown a certain length, it's not going to change. And that process worked for probably well over 20 years, but apparently children or teens were committing crimes and they hadn't fully developed yet. So they determined that there were some flaws with that system. Fingerprints were generally becoming accepted around the time that the Bertillon system was having some issues. So fingerprints eventually replaced the Bertillon system, but the Bertillon system was the basis for classifying and identifying criminals.
In 1892, Juan Vucetich of the Argentinian police used a bloody fingerprint to identify a woman named Frances Rojas, who murdered her 2 sons. This is the first recorded use of criminal fingerprint identification, which made Sir Francis Galton, a British anthropologist and a cousin of Charles Darwin, publish his book, Fingerprints. This book contains the first classification system for fingerprints and states Galton's calculations that the odds of 2 different fingerprints being the same is 1 in 64 billion, virtually impossible. As the fingerprint analyst Tom Burr puts it, fingerprints started out as ways to identify criminals, not in terms of evidence in court, but to tell Tom from Joe. When scientists found out that every person's fingerprints were different, even identical twins, then prints became crime scene evidence. In 1900, after analyzing the collective studies of fingerprints, the UK Home Secretary Office agreed to replace the Bertillon system with this system of fingerprinting to ensure better accuracy. In 1901, the fingerprint branch at New Scotland Yard was created and used Henry's system of fingerprint identification. Many think this act was the event that made fingerprinting accepted worldwide as a form of criminal investigation. This assumption seems to be correct because not long after, in 1903, the New York State Prison became the first place to use this system as a way to identify criminals in the United States. And thus, forensic fingerprinting was born. The first decisive change fingerprinting caused in our world's security is seen through how it directly impacted criminal cases. Before the mid-1800s and before fingerprint evidence was accepted in court, there was no scientific way to prove someone's guilt or innocence in a crime. All argument was based on description and physical measurement of the possible perpetrator. The flaw in this system is that appearances can change and people can grow, but fingerprints stay the same throughout your lifetime. Fingerprints are the only unchangeable physical aspect of people known to man, and since the classification of these patterns, no 2 fingerprints have been found the same.
And as far as going to court and how reliable it is, it's going to be very reliable. It is proven over several hundred years, and with the use of the APHIS machine, where we do probably 1 billion fingerprint comparisons a day, no 2 fingerprints have ever been found to be the same.
If found as clues, fingerprints are a very foolproof way to be certain of your culprit, so it is understandable that once the fingerprint branch at New Scotland Yard was created and fingerprint evidence became accepted, crime rates dropped tremendously. Repeat offenders of the law were finally held responsible for their actions by being convicted and put in jail. This positive change helped rid the street of crime and made towns and cities safer. These facts prove how even on the local level, fingerprint identification helped make the world a more secure place. Another way this event was a pivotal point in world security is by how it's used to track people. In America, over 800,000 children go missing every year. In 1997, the American Football Coaches Association had a wish to decrease these troubling statistics, thus founding the National Child Identification Program. This program freely distributes ID kits that direct parents to document their child's fingerprints as a safety precaution.
That program involves fingerprint kits that are distributed to parents either through churches or schools, and the children's fingerprints are taken using inkless fingerprint pads, and the parent has the prints at home, and let's just say the child is abducted or they run away. The parent can then take those prints to the local law enforcement agency and have them entered into the NCIC system, which is a National Crime Information Center database. And later on down the line, if say, the child ran away and they committed a crime, when those prints are entered into the NCIC, a match is made, and so that parent will be notified that their child is in, another state or another city.
This system has proven to be very successful and would not have saved all these children without the discovery of fingerprint identification years ago. The last positive change this discovery made is seen through modern-day forensics. A few years after fingerprinting became a big phenomenon, many organizations and programs were established to further expand the knowledge of science used in crimes. An example of this claim is the International Association for Identification, IAI, founded in 1915. This was the first professional forensics organization, and according to their website, was made to support work identified as important to forensic scientists and research efforts to help develop performance standards, guidelines, and reports that support advancement within the forensic science community. For the next couple of years after its commencement, this organization only met to discuss new findings made in the forensics community. In 1977, the first professional certification for forensic scientists was created, the IAI's Certified Latent Print Examiner Program. In this program, you could only be certified if you met the rigorous criteria. Your certificate could also be potentially revoked because of excessive errors such as incorrect identifications. This certificate program spurred more organizations and programs to be made to improve the overall accuracy of forensic science. This being said, those other programs push their students to expand beyond the realms of just the science of fingerprints and into the body and human DNA. Through these other programs, we've discovered DNA fingerprinting, which has become a much more advanced and accurate way to solve crimes. DNA fingerprint evidence, such as blood and saliva, is more widely known to people in today's world, especially with the excessive number of crime-solving shows on television.
With fingerprints, which we've had over several hundred years in the United States, that we've used fingerprints in the criminal justice system, but it also led to the DNA. By the science and individualizing people, we went from fingerprints to DNA and going back to fingerprints also, because in fingerprints, even in identical twins, they are different. And as we're in DNA, identical twins are going to have the same DNA, exactly the same. So we couldn't tell them apart, but fingerprints is still very important, even though we have DNA because of that.
The national interest in helping our knowledge of forensic science grow and the advancement of being able to identify a person through their body fluid has undoubtedly increased the protection of our country's people, and all of that glory can be given to the discovery of fingerprint identification. In summation, the discovery of being able to identify a person by their fingerprints has, in more ways than one, caused a decisive change or turning points in our nation's security. The evidence used in criminal courts is now backed up by an unchangeable aspect of our anatomy, which has greatly increased the safety of our towns and cities. Missing people are able to be found quicker through the use of national databases, and curiosity has driven us to create large institutions and fantastic technology dedicated to keeping our world safe and fair. The discovery of fingerprint identification is the foundation for criminal investigation history, and is the main reason why you live in a safer world today.